On January 2nd, 1999, I was 17 and a senior in high school. It was Saturday at the end of Christmas break. The plan had been for me to go to the farm with my dad that day, but the night before I had a great teenage moment and complained that I wasn't going to be able to sleep in for the last time before school started on Monday. So I stayed home. The phone rang around noon. I could tell from the tone in my mom's voice that something was wrong, so I headed into the kitchen. A man from our church had called because his son-in-law worked for the Salem Fire Department, and he had been called to Newland Farms in Patoka. We didn't know anything about it, and so Mom hung up and called the farm. Nobody answered. She called my dad's truck phone. No one answered. She called my aunt's house. She lived in a small house on our farm property, but no one answered. So she repeated all of those phone calls, and finally there was an answer at my aunt's house from our friend Jeremy. Mom told him why she was calling and asked what was going on. And after a long pause, she simply said, "What do I do?" In that moment, I stepped into our dining room. I knelt down and I prayed. I prayed harder than I had ever prayed before. I just kept saying over and over again, "God, I don't care if we lose our farm. I don't care if we lose our house, everything. Just please let my daddy be okay." Eventually, my mom hung up the phone, and I stood up, and we met in the doorway of the kitchen. And I can hear her words today as clearly as I did then. "There's been an accident at the farm. The tractor flipped over and is on top of Daddy. They are working to get it off of him, but they think that he is dead." With those few words, my world fell apart, and the carpet was pulled out from under me, and I just dropped to the ground and sobbed. Within 30 minutes, the word had spread, and our home began to fill with family and friends and lots of food. We cried, and we shared stories, and we laughed. There are parts of the next week that are completely a blur to me, and other parts that are so vivid and clear. The visitation a few days later lasted 7.5 hours, and the funeral was standing room only. The amount of lives that my dad's life had touched were more than I could really fathom. But then we were supposed to move on. Life keeps going. Our family left, and then it was just Mom and me. At first, we had to take it day by day, and if I'm honest, sometimes minute by minute. I went back to school, but was home an hour later the first day. The next day, I made it almost 2 hours. And by the end of the week, I had lasted all day. But I was hurting, I was angry, and I was confused. I didn't have time for silly, petty teenage things anymore. I started to fake my way through the next few months. I did what I was supposed to do and acted the way a good preacher's daughter should act. But I was just going through the motions. In March, we sold all the livestock at the farm. In May, I graduated high school. In June, we put our house up for sale and began looking for a smaller place. In July, we found a place, sold our house, and had a massive garage sale. In August, we sold all the equipment at the farm and the supplies that were left, moved into our new house, put the farm up for sale, and I packed up to go to Bible college. I was an emotional wreck. I was angry at God. And now I lived in constant fear that something was going to happen to my mom. And through all of this, I could feel people praying for me. And I knew that I should be leaning into God for comfort, but I was still so angry that He let this happen. This January will mark 20 years since that happened. And I could go on and on about the people that God placed in my life to love me and to comfort me, especially that first year of college. I could talk about each instance that I've been able to walk this path with someone else. And I could try to explain how the anger and the fear and the depression that I felt eventually faded into a new and stronger walk with Jesus. And I would share with you all the ups and downs, but I don't think I have time for that in this video. I think the language used in Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death, has great meaning, especially in the context of grief. I imagine this beautiful, lush area with a deep, dark valley over to the side. And you see the dark area, but you don't want to go there, and you hope you never have to. But somehow, in a split second, you find yourself right in the middle of that dark place. Grief is that place that you're going to have to journey through, or maybe even climb or claw your way out of, so that you aren't stuck there for the rest of your life. I've learned a few things about grief in the last 20 years. There is no shortcut through the valley of the shadow of death. You need to go through it or climb your way out, but at your pace. After a while, I stopped crying every day, or even every week or every month. However, then there were times that the grief would hit me all over again, and I was just a puddle on the floor. All of that is okay, and it's just part of the process. We have to remember that Jesus wept over Lazarus' death, and God knows about watching someone you love die as he watched his son die for each one of us. So let yourself feel all the emotions that you need to feel. And sometimes the best thing you need to do is just let yourself cry. Speaking of emotions, God is a big God. And he can take your confusion, your anger, your hurt, whatever you've got, because he loves you and he's with you. And he knows your pain and wants to help you reach the other side. There are all kinds of grief in this world. We usually associate grief with the death of someone, but there is grief at the end of a marriage. There is grief when your relationship with your child is strained or non-existent. There's grief when you lose a job or you get laid off. There's grief when you can't have the family that you desperately want. There is grief in the midst of unhealthy, toxic relations. And there is grief in fill in the blank, whatever you're dealing with right now. There are all kinds of valley of the shadow of death that people have to go through. We've got to figure out how to be more kind and show empathy to others who are going through hard times and who sometimes lash out at us. To give people the benefit of the doubt before condemning them. So many people are struggling with or through something because there is all kinds of grief in this world. God is sovereign. Yes, I truly believe that he could have saved my dad that day, but instead he said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I have often said that I would give anything to have my dad here with me, but I would never ask him to leave the presence of God, to come back here. He cannot return to me, but as David said, I will someday go to him. Because of my walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I have walked this with kids and teenagers and other adults. Because of my grief, I can offer comfort to others in their grief. Because God truly is working all things for our good. And I can see that at this point in my story. This verse, Psalm 23, verse 4, ends with comfort. "I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." God is right by your side, and we have nothing to fear, and we can run to find comfort in his arms. Don't get stuck in the valley of the shadow of death. Don't let the fear of death take over your life. God really is with you, and he loves you more than you will ever understand.